If you work for the Catholic Church and want to transform the culture of your parish and put more souls in the pews, we are here to help. I'm John Kahns, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, your favorite leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Each week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we are talking with Mike Ferrell, the monk guy. With over 35 years of experience in leadership development and strategy coaching, he is going to be our expert guide for today. He's a third order Benedictine Oblate and a heck of a golfer. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, John, good to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know a little bit about you. I started saying third order, and then I my mind went blank for a little bit. Did I get that right?
Well, I don't know about third order, but
okay,
Benedictine Oblate. So,
that's what it is. Okay.
Nobody's told me about any level of orders, so you know.
All right. Fair enough. Well, it's good to have you on the podcast. We've had a few conversations. We've known each other going way back, but are just kind of getting reintroduced here, reconnected. And I'd love for you to tell everybody just a little bit in your own words about who you are and what you do. Give them the spiel.
Okay. All right. We'll keep it in the Reader's Digest version so we don't lose them 2 hours in. Well, I've been doing leadership and strategy development, coaching and consulting for going on 40 years now. It's been a long time. Prior to doing that, I spent 5 years in the seminary at what's now the University of St. Thomas. It was College of St. Thomas back then, and St. John Vianney Seminary. Graduated from there, did a little blip into St. Paul Seminary, and then discerned out. Spent a couple of years in Catholic education as a director of education for 3 parishes, after a couple of years of that, and basically refereeing 4 priests that couldn't sit in the same room together, I decided that maybe it was time to go into the business world. So had been in the business world prior to that. I'd also spent some time prior to the seminary playing golf for a living and did that as well. But went into the business world and really was very fortunate in that my first client, we hit a home run, and I got real popular real fast, and spent many years traveling all over the country, doing the work that I've been doing, and finally in 2008 and 2009, when the financial crisis hit, at that point I was working with a number of community banks, financial advisors. I'm doing a lot of work in the financial services world, and that point really was a situation where I had to kind of stop and recalibrate and really figure out what was it that was I knew that was going to happen.
That's all good.
So anyhow, I had to stop and recalibrate, and really at that time, as I was working with these financial people with the financial crisis, I spent probably the better part of 3 years really talking folks off ledges and really getting them to figure out how to survive and sometimes even thrive in that environment. And by 2011, 2012, I was pretty well burnt. I really had needed to step away and find some peace and quiet and really kind of decide what the next chapter looked like. And into that process, I was introduced to the Rule of Benedict. And initially, when I read that book, it was interesting, but it was like, well, this is written for a bunch of monks 1,500 years ago, but as I began to really kind of devour it and really understand the principles behind it, what fascinated me was the fact that we have a document that's 1,500 years old that still to this day is a blueprint for how we live and work in community.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see, I mean, you can imagine the connection there with so much of the problems of the 2008, the financial crisis was based off of people making unprincipled
Right.
decisions,
That's exactly
poor,
right.
immoral decisions
Right.
that led to this situation. So for you to then discover this, I mean, that had to be like a light bulb moment for you.
Right. Right. And what I had decided at that point, even as I was learning about the rule, I decided at that point that I really wanted to write at that point what was my second book, called The Sweet Spot, and that was really a reflection of what happened during that financial crisis. Why did some organizations survive and some even thrive versus the ones that didn't make it? And I really began to reflect on that and go back and look at the many clients that I had worked with during that time, and what were the key points that really allowed them to survive and sometimes thrive. And what I found is there were three. Number one, they had good strategy. There was no question that their business strategy was sound. Secondly, and they didn't know it at the time because this was still a relatively new term, they were exercising the principles of positive psychology in their organization, in the way they led. They were exercising those principles. But thirdly, which was actually the most surprising one for me, was the fact that they all had a faith connection. They were all very faith driven. They were all really connected to their faith. And those that really survived and thrived during that time really leaned into that. They leaned into that faith connection. And that, in addition to, learning and really beginning to understand this rule of Benedict, those were really the things that kind of the light bulb went on as I wrote that second book. And I thought, this is something the world needs to hear more of.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as you're talking about this, what I'm curious about, and for our listeners, is that you teach about this rule of Saint
Yep.
Benedict, and obviously 1,500-year-old roadmap for sustainable leadership. So how do we take this, and obviously you've made it, helped a lot of businesses to achieve success, joyful success, not just
Hmm.
like they're not burnt out chasing after this thing.
Right.
How do we like speak into parish work, with this place where you did work
Sure.
once upon a time and ministry today, and how we could apply it, and there might even be kind of a reversal of why some parishes struggle, why ministries struggle, versus why a secular institution might struggle. Speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the I've kind of boiled the rule of Benedict down into five principles that I talk about and teach, and it's intention, it's stability, it's community, it's excellence, and it's profound hospitality. Those five key principles are really what I work in and coach and teach. And whether it's with businesses or other types of organizations, I've even done it with parishes. And it really is really looking at number one, intention is how are we, what's the driving force behind what we're doing. Secondly, stability is that rootedness, that groundedness in what we're doing, and are we grounded in the Gospels? Are we grounded in what it is that we're doing for our community? Third is community, and how do we build up community, and really looking at what that particular process and method is. I think, and I like to tell the story that there's in today's business world, the hot buzzword is culture. And I think that culture is just fine, but culture without community doesn't work. And I think if you look at some of the things that have happened since COVID, with some of the different programs and approaches and things that people did, whether it's DEI or any of those other things, I think what happened is we took something from that we were calling culture, and we tried to just apply it to existing. And the problem with that is the foundation. And I love to use the story when I do speaking. I talk about the fact that several years ago I bought a piece of unfinished furniture. And I'm not the handiest guy in the world. So, I've got this piece of unfinished furniture, and I go to Home Depot and say, okay, I want to finish this thing. Let's make it look nice. And I get some pimply faced kid that's in the paint department, and he hands me a can of lacquer, and he says, well, you just slap that on, it'll look great. So that's what I did. Slapped it on, looked great for 2 days until the lacquer started peeling off. So then, of course, I take the can, what was left of the can, back, and this time I get the old crusty guy in the paint department. And I said, "You guys sold me the junk. This stuff doesn't work." So he asked me what I did, and sort of gave me that look of, "Boy, you're really an idiot." Yeah, he said, "Well, here's what you got to do. First off, you got to strip off everything that's on there now. Then I'm going to give you a can of varnish, and you're going to take a cloth and you're going to rub that into the piece of furniture really well 2 or 3 times. Let that dry. Then you're going to slightly sand it, and then you're going to put the lacquer on, and then it'll actually stick." And so when I talk about this idea of community and culture, it's really community is that base. It's that really foundation. You can't have great culture without community. And community is really driven by empathy, by compassion, by the way that we make people matter. All of those types of things build community, especially from a leadership perspective. And then the last two are excellence and profound hospitality, and we'll get into more of those in a minute.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that you say that, because often when I'm speaking with churches, ministries, they've got this great idea of what they want their culture to be. And so often when you look at those statements that they'll put online on their About Me page, they'll try to list what the culture they want to have.
Right.
And the problem with that is that culture, you can't just define what you want to have and then boom, magic, that's what it
Right.
is. It's just a wishful statement. Culture is the beliefs, the practices, it's the things you do. So
Right.
properly stated, it's a definition of how we are, is what culture would be. So it's actually more important to sit down and think about your systems,
Yep.
your processes, your community, how you want your community to interact with each other, and put in place the pieces that are necessary for them to act in that way, to behave in
Right.
that way, to live in that way. And so that's such an important piece that people often miss, is you can't just define it and wish
Right.
that it will be that way and hope and dream then and see that it'll come through. No, you
Right.
actually have to sit down and think about how we do things, how we live in community with each other. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, tell us a little more about how some of the ways you see these principles embodied in different organizations. I think that's really helpful to get those
Right. And
tangible examples.
one other thing I'll say about that community and culture is that a lot of times culture is the what we're doing,
Hmm.
community is the how we're doing it.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
the significant difference, I think, is that it's the foundation, it's how we're doing it, it's not what we're doing. We're not just slapping another program out there to say this is how we're building our culture. It's how we're doing it first, and then we're layering that on top. So I think that's
I
a
was just consulting with a Catholic school, and we were trying to look at, they're trying to really focus on financial viability into the future.
hmm
And in our workshop with them, we spent a lot of time talking about how their mission and vision statement was so focused on what they do. They run
Right.
a school. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but actually the reason why you exist, which is it's that foundation that I think you said foundation earlier, that the foundation under that is you exist to preach the gospel. And if you don't understand that,
Right.
yes, you're going to miss the mark on all of these other pieces, because your reverberating reason for existing is lacking from all of your communication. And for that
Yeah.
reason, it falls short. Like you couldn't send me a mailer and say, "Hey, we run a Catholic school. Do you want to support us?" I'm going to go, "I've never heard of you. I don't know where
Right.
you are. I've got local needs that I'd like to meet." Like that doesn't resonate with me. But if you
Right.
say, "Hey, we're preaching the gospel to these people and this is how we're doing it," and this, like that reverberates deeper with the
Right.
mission that we live, it touches the soul, the heart,
Right.
I'm glad you
Right.
said that.
Yeah, and I refer to that as higher purpose vision.
Mm,
What is the higher purpose vision? Why do we exist? Why are we trying to do what we're trying to do? And Catholic and I'm going through a whole process with a Catholic school closing here right now, and that whole process of understanding that the higher purpose vision is the whole definition of what Catholic education should be in canon law and by the popes and all of those things. It's that teaching not only from the parent standpoint, but from the bishop standpoint, from the school standpoint, all of those things. That's the higher purpose vision, is teaching the gospel message. And
Mm.
so I think I say it, and I taught when I work with organizations and businesses, I have those conversations from a higher purpose vision. Why do you exist? And it's not just why you exist for profit or for market share or all those kinds of things. Let's go even further. Let's go higher. Let's determine why you exist from a common good perspective. Why do you exist from a standpoint of doing the right thing? Those kinds of things versus, just more money and more market share and all those. So, and I think then to kind of move on to the next principle is this idea of excellence.
Mm.
And excellence starts with the idea, and this is the one thing that I think we do not do very well in the Catholic Church, is the idea of innovation.
Mm.
And really understanding that we have to, if we're going to grow our parishes, if we're going to grow our ministries, we have to begin looking under every rock. I created a program called the Parish Innovation Project. And in that project, in those series of workshops that we did, it was really an organized brainstorming session. And I basically told people that, you know what? If it's been done in the last 10 years or 15 years here, you don't get to put it on the board. We're going to start thinking outside the lines. We're going to start thinking outside the box. We're going to start looking at other denominations. We're going to start looking at the business world. We're going to innovate. We're going to really think about or think differently about how we do this. And, along those lines, Adam Grant's got a great book called Think Again. And that book, he talks about, we typically think like a preacher, a prosecutor, or a politician. And sometimes we do it all at the same time. With my grandson, I do it all at the same time.
Mhm.
First I try and get him to do something for the good of doing it. Secondly, I try and get him to do something because he better do it or else. Thirdly, when that doesn't work, I bribe him with a candy bar. So, I cover all three of them all at one shot with him. But what Grant says is that we need to really start thinking more in the lines of a philosopher or a scientist, in that we question everything. And I think that from a parish standpoint, from a parish leadership team standpoint, and from the people in the pews, we need to begin to question everything that we do and think about, is there a better way to do it? Is there a different way to do it? Is there a method that we can put into place that continually looks at that process?
Yeah, I really love that. I wrote an article for the diocesan newsletter in Sioux Falls a while back, and what you're speaking to, this is what I think of, is that everybody's got an apostolate within them. There's something
Yes.
specific that we are called to do. So, right, um, I am called to look at the gifts, the abilities that God has given me, and to think about how they are to be used in service of my family, my community, my parish, like in the world. And
Yep.
we all have that within us. And I often think of it as like an apostolate incubator, and how valuable that would be. Like yes, I think it would be popular. I think people would enjoy it.
Hmm.
But how that's, I mean, that's all that Mother Teresa did. Same Mother Teresa,
Right.
she
Right.
just she had this call within her that she followed through on, and that's what we're all called to. And if our parishes began to think that way, with
Hmm.
innovation, with how do we help people get in touch with the call on their life, and how to practically like discern and apply that here and now in our communities,
Right.
I just can't. I mean, it would set the whole world on fire. It would be
Right.
amazing. I
Absolutely.
love that. You had said something a little bit ago, or you had just done excellence. You wanted to speak about profound hospitality. Yeah, let's give you a
Yeah.
chance
Well,
to
and
discuss that.
profound hospitality, I believe, is, if we don't figure that out, it's the future of the church.
Mm.
All you have to look at is the way that some of these mega churches and other denominations operate. They've figured it out.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, in most cases, we as Catholics have not figured it out. We do not do a very good job. How many times have you been to a parish, and it's a parish that you've never been to, and you walk in and nobody greets you? Nobody wants to slide down the pew so you can sit in their spot. We see this all the time, and that's just a very simple example. I
Mhm.
think that the idea of profound hospitality, and I wrote an article on LinkedIn a few months ago, and the title of the article is "What Would You Do If Christ Walked in the Door to Your
Mhm.
Business?" Benedict says that we treat everyone as Christ and that we welcome everyone as Christ. And really, when we began to think about that, when we began to think about what does that really look like, what does that really mean? This idea of profound hospitality, and I talk about welcoming, I talk about authenticity, I talk about presence, I talk about surprise and delight, and detail. These are the five key points in profound hospitality that if we measure everything we do against that, then we began to break down these walls that people think that we're just going to, be the same thing that we have been for years and years and years. And so that idea of profound hospitality, I think, is vital. And it's interesting because if you visit a Benedictine monastery anywhere in the world, in most cases, when you arrive there, everything else shuts down so that they can welcome you as the guest.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's always it's fascinating because it really is that's their thing is really
Mhm.
making sure that that guest is treated as Christ and that everything revolves around that guest. And so if we did that as a church, if we did that as a parish, if we did that as a diocese, think of the power that that would have. Talk about, setting people on fire. That would set them on fire because all of a sudden we create, and again, it gets back to this whole idea of community. We began to create this community. We began to really understand that when we're accepting everybody as Christ, now we got something.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little more because I'm thinking of the pastor that's listening to this, the
Hmm.
DRE that's listening to this, and they're thinking, "Man, I love this kind of this vision, this picture we're painting of a parish that's got these five principles in place. They really have time to think about this profound, this profound hospitality that you're talking about, and they really want this." But the
Hmm.
next thought in their head is like, well, we've got a pastor change coming up here. We're getting a new pastor in another year. He's never going to be on board. There's constant change. They've got the staff turnover, at parishes
Yep.
is unreal. Somebody's looking for their next their next shift.
Yep.
Priorities shift then when you've got a new pastor in, when you've got new staff coming in. And then just the reality that like the busyness of parish life, like any other
Sure.
place, you have this whirlwind of maintenance, just like the next mass, getting ready for that, the next liturgical season and stuff. And they're starting to think like, how do we possibly do this? And I'm wondering if you could speak a little about the role of where stability meets that vision, so
Right.
that they have the room to think about innovation and renewal.
Yep. Well, stability is probably the key point in the Rule of Benedict. Benedict talks about the different types of monks, and the one that I think really hits home is the gyrovag. One of my favorite terms, and the gyrovag is that monk that's always looking for something better. They're always looking
Mm,
for the grass greener on the other side of the hill. And I think as a professional in ministry, the first question is, am I a gyrovag, or am I a Cenobite where I am rooted and grounded? When you take the vows of a Benedictine nun or monk, and even as an oblate, you commit your life to that one place. And I think that's the one thing that I think if we could truly understand that we commit ourselves to that parish, we commit ourselves to that team, then I think we can begin to look at things differently. Now, in reality, does that really happen? It's extremely difficult because, as you said, we have leadership changes. I think that one of the things that, and I've seen this so many times over, 40 years of doing this and being involved in different Catholic parishes in different places around the country. One of the challenges I think that we have is we talk about the clergy. Um, and clergy, if you're out there listening, don't take this personally, but in most cases, clergy are not taught to lead. It's not something that's in there. I mean, there are certainly some of them that are great leaders, but there are a lot of them that aren't. And I think the
Well,
challenge. Go
and
ahead.
I would even say, even if they have a charism of administration, they're not given the practical tools to implement
Right.
that charism. And I
Right.
think I think most priests would agree with you there in my experience of talking with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that it's not even the administration piece. They just simply aren't taught, and they typically have to learn it sort of on the fly, that leadership, number one, isn't management. Leadership is about influence. It's about making sure that people have the tools and have the ability to make the parish successful, or the diocese successful, or whatever it is. And so I think it's really important that as Catholic ministry professionals, we understand that the more we can help the pastor do that, the better chance that we have of creating stability. And so I think that's something that we have to and I think one of the challenges that I've seen in ministry and clergy is that the laity doesn't have a tendency to take ownership. We let the pastor take ownership, and we just follow the directions, and sometimes, and in many times, those directions are misguided. And so I think the thing about it is, we as laity, we as whether it's ministry professionals or just the parishioner in the pew, we have to start taking ownership of this stuff. We have to, and Pope Francis talked about this. We've heard Pope Leo now mention some of these things, that the laity needs to be able to start taking ownership of some of these things. And the clergy obviously needs to let go of some of these things to let the laity do that. But I think it's really important from a standpoint of stability that we understand that stability starts with that groundedness, with that rootedness, and again, getting back to this whole idea of higher purpose vision, making sure we all know why we're there, and what we're doing, and when those things start. And then I think the other piece about stability is making sure that everybody gets a seat at the table. Benedict talks about this in the rule. He talks about making sure that everybody is given the opportunity to give input. And I think so many times in parish life, um, ministry professionals don't feel like they're heard. They don't feel like their ideas are getting listened to, or acted upon. And so I think making sure that that parish team, pastor included, is really giving that opportunity so that everybody's heard. Benedict says sometimes the best ideas come from the new and the young monks, because they don't have all of the baggage that the ones that have been hanging around for have. So I think understanding that as long as we're, the opening line of the Rule of Benedict is listen with the ear of your heart. And as ministry professionals and as clergy, that first and foremost has to happen in order for us to have stability.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you a question. Wasn't in our script,
Yeah.
but in that same vein, that same spirit of making sure that everyone is heard. What kind of advice, or I guess the question is, what rhythm of accountability would be good? Just kind of like a baseline to get that started for a pastor coming into a new parish that really wants to listen intentionally, knows he needs to take time to do it, but having limited time. What rhythm of accountability, or maybe like key moments to take advantage of to create spaces where they can receive parishioners and staff to be able
Yeah.
to do that listening?
Well, and I think it's not unlike a new leader coming into a business or an organization.
Absolutely.
I think part of the challenge is that as a new leader, a lot of times we'll come into that position and we want to make a splash. And you and I both know of individuals that have wanted to do that, and and so they begin to throw all kinds of ideas out there, and that's all good and well, but if those ideas are coming, if I'm the leader and those are ideas are coming out of my head and they're not coming out of anybody else's head, now we got a problem. And so I think making sure initially that we have that we allow that space to, first off, let's get to know each other. As clergy coming in with a new staff, my gosh, take enough time to begin to at least know each other.
Mm,
Even getting back to the idea of profound hospitality, let's make sure that we all break bread together. Let's make sure that we all understand and know each other before we start thinking about what the next step is. And then allowing that space of reflection, allowing that space of input, of making sure that we have those opportunities, whether it's in meetings, whether it's in going away on a retreat, or whatever the case may be, making sure that we have that. I love the term you use of rhythm.
mm,
One of the things that I talk as I coach leaders, one of the things that I talk about is making sure that before you make a decision, you pause.
mm.
And the Benedictines call this statio. Before they go to prayer, before they go to work, before they go to a meal, they always pause and they get their heads right and their hearts right. And that idea of statio, in that we take time to pause before we make snap judgments and decisions. And when they're more important judgments and decisions, not only do we pause, but we discern. And understand that that's a process in and of itself. And I think allowing that process to play out, and having a clear guideline of how are we going to discern this? What are the steps to discernment to make sure that we understand what has to be done? Those are the things, as a leader. If I'm doing those things, the first thing that's going to happen is the people that I'm leading feel like they matter.
Mm.
And that is so vital when it comes to leadership.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I tell people a lot too is if there was one little like micro shift that I would recommend to just about any team, if they want to build their sense of communion, they want to make sure people have a chance to be heard and supported.
Right.
At the last 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes of any meeting, staff meeting you have, the question is there anything that you need from another member of the team to be able to do what you need to do this
Right.
week?
Right.
And I think that one little question at the
Yep.
end, give yourselves 5-10 minutes so Ethel can say, hey, you know what? I've got 15 phone calls I got to make. I got 1,000 copies I need to make, yada, yada, yada. Does anybody have some time just to like make
Yeah.
a couple phone calls, or does anybody have time just to make some copies for me this week? That would be super
Right.
helpful. And just being able to open that up, suddenly you're not thinking in your silos. You're thinking as a team, like, yeah, this is how we accomplish these objectives together. I just
Right.
think it opens up that dialogue. I mean, it's so important to
Yeah.
just have these little moments where
Yeah.
you can create the opportunity to build more of a culture of communion as opposed
Right.
to just compliance.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I think the other piece of that is at the beginning of the meeting.
Oh, sure.
Let's start off with the celebrations. Let's start
Mm,
out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be work celebrations. And in fact, in many cases, it's not. Every single time I do a workshop or a retreat or a board situation or something like that, the first thing that we want to start with is, number one, let's celebrate something good that's happened.
hmm
And then number two, let's show gratitude. Let's come up with one or two things that have happened. And it's always fun when I get an early morning group because, right out of the blocks, I'll say, all right, I want 3 things that you're grateful for that have already happened today. You
hmm
know, and it's like, oh, geez, didn't plan on that.
Well, that's that positive positive psychology that you mentioned
Exactly. Yeah.
earlier.
And we
Mhm.
talk about the Kim Cameron from the University of Michigan has done extensive research on what he calls the heliotropic effect.
That's where I was headed next. Please go ahead.
Yeah. And so the heliotropic effect is this idea that all living organisms are drawn to light. Here in South Dakota, you can drive out to central South Dakota in the fall or late summer and drive by a sunflower field in the morning, and all the flowers are pointed east.
Mm.
When you come back by at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're all pointed to the west. That is the heliotropic effect. That's that following of the positive light. And so, from an organizational perspective, when we look at that, we can see that that in and of itself, and there's been all kinds of work done with many, many different organizations that really show this idea of this heliotropic effect. But one of the great research that came out of this whole study was from a group of nuns. And what they had done is they had tracked these nuns over like 80 years. And they found their diaries when they first went into the convent. They found their diaries. And so they tracked these nuns over a period of time. And what they found is the nuns that had written in their diaries initially, there was two groups. The one group was just praising God that they were there, and they knew that this was where they needed to be, and they couldn't wait to get started. And then there was another group that was more hesitant. I'm not sure that this is really for me. I'm not sure that this is where I belong.
Yeah.
But as they tracked them over their lifetimes, what they found is the group that had journaled uh, initially about how great they felt that they were in the right place and praising God that they outlived the other group significantly, and they live their lives that way. And I think we all know people that, you know, are can be incredibly positive, and then we all know a lot of people that are, Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, And so it's that idea, though, when we begin to look at that in organizations, we see that the organizations that flourish are the ones that really build this heliotropic effect. They're the ones that really create this positive, I call it positive environment. And the way that they do that is that they have positive communications. One of the greatest exercises that I can do when I'm coaching a leader is I want you to go back and look at your emails from the last 2 days. And I want you to categorize, are they positive, or how many are positive, how many are negative, and how many are neutral? And almost inevitably, the majority of them are either negative or neutral.
Mhm.
And so then I challenge them to say, all right, now let's figure out how we turn that language around to be more positive. So the idea of positive communication, positive climate, making sure that people feel welcomed. It gets back to that whole idea of community and profound hospitality. Positive meaning, again, making sure, and this goes back to this idea of stability, making sure that people understand the meaning and purpose of what we're trying to do. It is so vital. If you look at Gallup's statistics on disengagement, over 70% of the people that work today are either disengaged or actively disengaged, which is a huge hit to any organization, including a parish. If you've got people that are disengaged or actively disengaged, I can guarantee you're not achieving what you want to do as a parish ministry team. And so understanding how do we connect our meaning, how do we connect that with what they're looking for in their purpose and meaning? And I think that's really important. We hear the term quiet quitting, or this, quiet resignation, or whatever you want to call it. I think what happens is that people kind of give up, and they don't feel like they're being heard. And so making sure that we're creating an environment that's allowing to do that. And I think the other piece of that is really then understanding, are we utilizing our strengths? Are we utilizing our God-given talents? And are we based on virtue? Are we exercising good character? And there's all kinds of tools that we can use to kind of assess that, to see where that's at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate I think this idea is going to give a lot of freedom to people's hearts, like this heliotropic effect. If you are stuck in a situation where everything's negative all the time, and you got someone grumpy up front in your
Right,
parish, your pastor's a grumpy puss, and 2 or 3 members on the staff team are really Eeyores too. Like, it can be really hard. So it's important to then bring out the good. And
right.
the way that can transform a community, that the way that can transform an experience is intense. And what I'd like to point out is all of the little things that you mentioned, they're not big things. They're not
Right.
monumental shifts in how you
Yep.
do stuff. They're nuanced shifts with an intention behind them. And
Yep.
that can have a kind of this compounding effect over time that is so profound in the experience of the Catholic ministry professional, even if it's at least in the life of the individual that's listening. Maybe you can't
Right.
transform your entire parish team,
Right.
but you can transform your experience with some of these shifts as well. And that to me is why it's so important to start with that vision, that understanding of why we exist, that goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, having that strong foundation.
Right.
I think even for, again, for the pastor that's listening, whoever it might be, we talked about a little end exercise, that beginning exercise that you said, and even just to start it with, like, if you're a pastor who's really trying to like rally your team around you and like sow just the spirit in it, start with that why, start with that
Right.
vision. Like, this is what we're here to do. And Ethel, I see you doing it when you do this. I
Right.
see you. I see God working in you when you have those conversations with people on the phone. It doesn't matter who calls in or for whatever reason, they get your full presence. And I see Christ at work in that. To
Right.
call that out, that's going to light someone's entire week up.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Absolutely. What great advice.
And I think the other piece of that is that making sure that you're allowing people, and one of the things that I talk to leaders about all the time is don't just make it work related.
Hmm.
What great is going on in your life? What did you see somebody else do that had nothing to do with work, but you wanted to celebrate that? They did something with their kids, or they were involved in something that they got recognized for that had nothing to do with work. Start to understand the importance of the positiveness that
Yeah.
happens when we begin to recognize people for any of those things.
Even think about the application of that to like the pastor who's not a great homilist, or
Yeah.
the DRE who's got to be in front of people all the time, but they're not a great presenter. The power of these little stories, these little call outs to take what might just be a basic kind of teaching, but to give a really powerful personal application that can sow in the
Right.
hearts of the people present is to say, I was with so and so as he was dying this week. And
Yeah.
and I want to share with you the light and where I experienced God in that moment. Or, we just had this baptism that we just had, and I want us to think about what happened here, where we yes raised up these kids, like, but we as a community get. I mean, just to point out these little things can
Right.
be such a profound little story moment that really helps the spirit to come alive in people, that this flourishing to start. So we're kind of getting towards the end of our time together,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering for then the Catholic leader that's listening right now, who's inspired but maybe a little overwhelmed. What's one small Benedictine inspired shift that you would really encourage that they can make this week to bring more flourishing and less grumbling into their
Right,
ministry?
right, right. Well, I think that goes right to the first line of the Rule of Benedict. Listen with the ear of your heart. It is
Mm.
so easy to get caught up in all of the stuff that's going on. And it's not just in our parishes or in our diocese. All we have to do is look at what's going on in the world today. There is so much uncertainty. There is so much division. And when we begin to listen with the ear of our heart first, we began to break down those things. We began to turn negatives to positives. Because when we listen with compassion, when we listen with empathy, when we listen with understanding, now we create that dialogue, that conversation between us that's very different than dealing with the negativity. And I think there's so much of that negativity today that that has to be the starting point. And then the other piece that I would say is as we look at change, as we look at dealing with change, don't try and change everything once. I talk about changing it 1 degree a week. How do we make 1 degree a week change so that by the time we get to the end of the year, we've made a 52-degree change in what it is we do? And I know Ken Blanchard talks about that in Raving Fans as well. But it really is what's one small thing we can do each week that begins to turn things toward that positive environment that we want in our teams and in our staff and in our parish, and then allowing people to give the input and the feeling like they're part of the process.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, this has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Is there anywhere you'd like to invite our listeners? If somebody, a principle they heard today, they'd like to learn more, maybe they're thinking about
Sure.
becoming a Benedictine oblate, where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, themonkguy.com. That's the easiest place. That's my website, and there's all kinds of stuff on there, including I've got a brand new book that I'm hoping will be out by the end of the year. We're working on it feverishly right now, called More Thriving, Less Grumbling. And so when that comes out, that'll also be announced on the website as well. And then also we've got a great along the lines with your podcast, I've got a great podcast that I do called Resonance, and it's a podcast for leaders that unpacks the power of song, silence, and strategy. I've got a couple of friends of mine that I do it with, a Grammy-nominated singer and songwriter by the name of Steve Azar, and
Maybe you've heard of him.
yeah, exactly. Yep. An organizational PhD. His name's Randy Harrington out of Oregon. So the three of us do that podcast, and those new episode drops every Thursday, and they're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the major platforms. So
Wonderful. All right. Well, guys, listeners, please look Mike up. Mike, thanks for being on the podcast today.
my pleasure, John.
All right. And thank you for listening to the podcast. If today's episode got you thinking about how your parish could come alive, don't let it be just another good idea. Take this episode, text it to a priest or a friend in ministry, and start that conversation today. Remember, one saint can make all the difference, and we believe that you were made for such a time as this. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.